My fiancé said, "If I wanted passion, I'd just go back to my ex. You're the safe choice." I didn't say a word. That night, I packed everything she didn't know about. And when she woke up to the empty house, I will never forget the way the living room felt that evening. Rena had come home from her shift still wearing her bright hospital badge and humming like the whole world existed just to entertain her. I was in the hallway, out of sight, taking off my shoes when I heard her speaking to someone on speakerphone. She had this casual tone she used when she wanted to sound superior without trying. At first, I thought she was talking about work or her usual complaints about coworkers. Instead, I heard my name connected to a sentence that locked me in place as if the floor had changed under me. She told her friend Sonata that passion was something she only ever felt with her ex, the man she used to see during her college years. She described me as stable and useful, someone dependable who would never walk away. She acted as if loyalty made me simple-minded, and her voice suggested she believed I would never notice anything she hid. I stayed silent behind the hallway wall, not because I was shocked into stillness, but because something inside me clicked. I had always paid attention to small details, and suddenly everything that seemed odd over the last few months lined up in a clearer way than I expected. Rena ended the call as if she had discussed a new couch or a sale she missed. Then she strolled into the kitchen humming again. I walked in casually, greeting her with the same calm voice I always used. She looked at me with that bright expression she saved for moments when she wanted everything to look normal. She asked about dinner plans and talked about her coworker winning some raffle at work. I agreed to everything she said, and she acted as if nothing unusual had happened in the last 10 minutes. The rest of the evening felt like a performance on her part. She kept trying to force normal conversation, as if she sensed I had been nearby, but wanted to believe she was safe from consequences. Early signs had shown up long before that day. Little shifts in her routine made more sense now. She had been more protective of her phone, placing it face down every time it buzzed. She had been leaving earlier for work and returning slightly later, claiming the shifts got extended or someone forgot to show up. She had even begun wearing perfume to the gym, claiming she liked feeling nice during workouts. I had noticed all of it, but none of it had enough weight to form a full conclusion. The sentence she said to Sonata, however, turned everything into a solid picture. I observed her as she moved around the house. At one point, she went upstairs to take a shower, and I looked at her bag that she had carelessly tossed onto the couch. Rena had never been careless with her belongings before. I could see the edge of a folded paper sticking out of a side pocket, so I lifted the bag. Inside, I found a receipt from a lakeside bar she had never mentioned visiting. The date and time matched a night she claimed she had worked overtime. The amount showed 2 drinks and a shared appetizer. The last detail made my chest tighten, not because I felt betrayed, but because it confirmed she had not only lied but done so in a predictable pattern. She had been meeting someone in a place far enough from her workplace that none of her co-workers would appear there unexpectedly. The lakeside bar was a known hangout for outdoor hobby groups, fishing circles, and bikers. It was also the place her ex, Demir, used to frequent. I knew this because she had randomly mentioned it years ago during a conversation about local restaurants. The smell of her shower gel drifted down the stairs, and I put the receipt back where I found it. I sat calmly on the couch scrolling through work emails while I waited for her to come down. When she did, she walked over and leaned into me with a tenderness that felt mechanical. She asked if I wanted to watch something together, and I nodded as if nothing was out of place. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone whenever she thought I was distracted. She checked it 3 times during the first 10 minutes of the show. She would lock the screen quickly, pretending she needed to adjust the volume or check the weather. I kept my reaction steady. I wanted her to think nothing had shifted. It allowed me to observe more without raising suspicion. She eventually fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. I watched her breathing slow, and I looked at the life I had built around someone who saw me as a placeholder. She believed predictable meant powerless. She assumed steadiness meant passivity. She had no idea that a quiet man could still walk out the door without announcing anything. When she finally went upstairs to sleep, I stayed awake a little longer. I opened my laptop and reviewed some of the documents I had stored on the cloud. I had all my personal records backed up because I never liked depending entirely on physical papers. Birth certificate copies, bank statements, investment accounts, the original lease from when I first moved into the apartment. Everything was neatly organized. She had assumed this apartment was something we both built together, but she had never asked about the paperwork. She had moved in with me, and I later added her to the utilities, not the lease itself. She never read the email attachment I forwarded her a year ago that showed only my name on the renewal. I knew this because she opened it in front of me and said she would review it later. As I sat there reviewing everything, I realized she had never expected consequences because she assumed I would cling to the relationship no matter how she treated it. She believed stability equaled dependency. That misunderstanding was the foundation of her confidence. I shut the laptop at midnight and went upstairs. She was already asleep, curled on her side, breathing softly. I lay down beside her, and she unconsciously shifted closer. The irony of her instinctual closeness contrasted with the distance she cultivated behind my back. Morning came quietly. Rena woke before me and left the room to get ready. I could hear her singing in the bathroom. She seemed relieved about something, though nothing had changed in the house. While she got ready, her phone lit up with a message. I saw the preview text appear from across the room. It was from someone saved under a generic name. The words referenced a place near the lake again, saying they hoped last night was not the last time. I turned away before she returned, and she left the house believing everything was fine. The moment the door closed behind her, I sat up and felt a strange sense of calm. Every detail that had seemed confusing over the past few months now formed a complete path. I understood what she valued, what she assumed, and how she moved. I understood she was preparing to drift toward her old habits, believing she could keep me as a stable fallback. I finally recognized that the sentence she said on that call was not an emotional outburst, but a quiet summary of how she saw her future. She wanted security from me and thrill from someone else. By the time I went downstairs, the house felt different. Not emotionally, physically. It felt like a space in transition. I knew this because I had already decided the night before that nothing she believed about my predictability would remain true for long. The awareness settled into me with a strange clarity. I opened her bag again, this time without hesitation. Alongside the receipt, I found something tucked deep inside, a hotel key card envelope. The logo showed a budget hotel near the airport. The date matched another night she had claimed to be covering a shift. That discovery did not set off shock or rage. It simply added the last missing piece. It was clear she had moved past the point of indecision. She had chosen a pattern she expected to continue unchecked. She thought her comments went unheard and her movements unnoticed. She believed she had time to explore whatever she wanted while keeping me as the life she would return to. She had no idea that her timeline had already ended. The morning after I found the hotel key envelope, I watched Rena leave for work with a light step, the kind she used when she thought the world had arranged itself for her convenience. She grabbed her insulated cup, kissed me on the cheek as if she wanted to leave a mark of innocence, and hurried out. The moment the door shut, I stood there for a few seconds listening to the house settle. I felt no rush of adrenaline, no frantic push to act. Instead, I felt a steady and deliberate clarity, the kind I had rarely experienced before. It was the clarity of knowing something irreversible had already happened, and pretending otherwise would waste time. I went upstairs and opened the closet where I kept a small fireproof lockbox. Rena had never asked about it. She joked once that it probably held old receipts or gadget manuals. Inside, I kept everything she had never taken the time to learn about. My savings accounts were separate, and they were larger than she imagined. I had a brokerage portfolio she thought was only a modest retirement fund. I kept the documents from the car title transfer I had completed before we started living together. I stored a folder with the original apartment lease where only my name appeared. Each thing represented a different stage of work and self-discipline that she never cared about enough to ask. I set everything on the bed. The pile looked smaller than the value it held. I leaned against the dresser for a moment, realizing how little she actually knew about me despite living in the same space. She believed she knew everything because I was consistent, but consistency is not the same as transparency. She misinterpreted predictability for simplicity. She had never considered that some people keep their life in order without announcing every detail. As I sorted through the papers, I came across a small envelope with a key to the storage unit I had rented years ago. She thought I had closed it because I no longer talked about it. She did not know that I kept some of my old belongings there, including heirlooms from my grandmother, gifts from my uncle, and the woodworking tools I used when I needed space to think. Most of my sentimental items were out of the apartment, and she had never questioned why I didn't decorate the place with them. She assumed I did not care enough to bring them in. I spent the next hour moving calmly through the apartment. I took note of what belonged to me and what belonged to her. I made a list on my phone, not because I needed proof for a future argument, but because I wanted a clear path when the time came to act. I walked into the office room and noticed her printer tray had a piece of paper sticking out. I pulled it out expecting to see a work schedule or a list of errands. Instead, I found a pre-approval letter addressed to her, offering a credit card with an absurd limit. The strange part was not the letter itself, but the small sticky note attached to it. On it was my full name and an email address that looked close to mine, but with one letter changed. The discovery did not trigger panic, but confirmed something I had started to suspect. She had begun forming the early steps of mixing my identity into her financial plans. It was still small, a surface-level attempt, but the intention was visible. The moment I realized she had considered using my personal information for her convenience, the air in the room felt heavier, as if the building itself reacted to the dishonesty floating in the walls. I placed the letter back exactly as I found it. There was no need to disturb anything yet. Instead, I opened the drawer of her desk and looked through the scattered notes she tended to ignore. Hidden beneath a stack of coupons was another receipt from the lakeside bar. This one was older and even more telling. It had 2 signatures at the bottom, both belonging to her. She had paid for 1 round of drinks while someone else had paid for the rest. The date matched a weekend trip she claimed she took with her coworker for a wellness expo. After gathering the last essentials I needed, I drove to the storage unit. Inside, everything looked exactly as I left it. I took a deep breath, realizing that most of my identity had existed here, preserved and untouched. I looked around at the old tools, the shelves of books, the framed photograph of my father, the camping gear from a trip long before I met Rena. A different version of my life existed here, steady, personal, untouched by her preferences. I packed the heirlooms and tools into my car. While doing that, I noticed something odd on the top shelf, a half-open box of electronics I had stored away. Inside were 2 old phones I had used years ago. One of them still had a functioning SIM card. I powered it on out of curiosity, and the battery surprisingly held enough charge to start. As it turned on, I realized the old number was still linked to several dormant accounts I had never closed. None of this directly involved Rena, but it reminded me how much of my life existed outside of her knowledge. That gave me a quiet sense of confidence. When I got home, I placed the retrieved items in the trunk of my car so I could move them later. I wanted the apartment to look normal until the moment it no longer needed to. Rena texted me around noon asking what I wanted for dinner. I answered casually, keeping my tone identical to every other day. She responded with a heart emoji as if her morning confession about passion never existed. I could imagine her sitting at her desk, flipping through charts, believing the world remained firmly under her influence. That evening, she arrived home carrying a small bag of groceries. She made pasta and talked about her day, complaining about a coworker who had taken a long lunch. I smiled occasionally, participated in the conversation, and watched her movements. When she bent down to pick up a fork she dropped, her phone fell from her pocket. A notification appeared briefly on the screen. It was a message from someone saved under a neutral name, referencing the lake again. She grabbed the phone so fast that she knocked over her water bottle. She tried to make it look like a clumsy moment. I let her have that illusion. After dinner, she went upstairs to shower again. This time I did not check her bag. There was no need. I had enough pieces to understand the pattern. Instead, I sat at the desk and opened the email account linked to our utilities. I downloaded the latest statement and confirmed once more that the lease remained under my name alone. She had never bothered to read any of the attachments I sent her over the past year. She assumed everything belonged to both of us because she lived there long enough to believe possession equaled ownership. She went to bed early. I stayed downstairs for a long time. I thought about all the conversations we had over the years and how little of my inner world she ever understood. She had always spoken as if I was predictable down to the last habit, yet she never realized predictability does not eliminate the ability to act. Around midnight, I stood up and walked to the coat closet. Inside, on the top shelf, was a duffel bag I used during weekend trips. I pulled it down and placed it on the couch. I went through the rooms quietly packing what mattered. Important notebooks, personal letters, 2 hard drives, some clothes, and the lockbox. I moved slowly so nothing seemed disturbed. I left the spaces neat. I left her belongings untouched. I treated the apartment like a place I was cleaning before moving out, even though she believed everything was still stable. The final moment of the night came when I opened the drawer of her nightstand. I did not plan to take anything from it. I simply wanted to understand the extent of her plans. Inside, I found a small notebook. She used it to track expenses and future goals. I flipped through it. Several pages in, I found a list titled The Next Stage. The list included steps about securing additional income, paying off her remaining debt, and convincing me to split my savings into a joint account. The last line said something that made me still for several seconds. It stated that she wanted to settle now and upgrade later. The phrase did not need context. The meaning was clear. I closed the notebook and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I returned to the living room. I zipped my duffel bag and placed it beside the front door. It contained everything she had never known I kept in order. The rest would come later, and she would never see it coming. Rena woke before sunrise the next morning. I was already gone by the time her eyes opened, but I imagined the moment clearly because I knew her patterns. She always reached for my side of the bed first, half-conscious, expecting warmth. Instead, her hand would have touched a cold sheet. She would have sat up quickly, brushing her hair aside, scanning the room for signs of me. The lack of noise downstairs would have unsettled her more than the empty space. She always said the house felt alive when I was in it, as if my presence gave it structure. That morning, without me, the place must have felt hollow. She called me 3 minutes after I left the neighborhood. I let the vibration buzz silently against the center console. I drove to a quiet parking lot behind my workplace and watched the phone light up again. Another call, then a third. She used short intervals at first because she assumed I simply did not hear. When I didn't answer those, she tried longer intervals, as if pretending to be composed. Eventually, she sent a string of messages asking where I had gone, insisting she was getting worried, claiming she had woken up confused. I sat in the driver's seat reviewing the messages without opening them. What she felt in those first minutes was not worry. It was the panic of losing control. She had built her entire plan around the belief that I would always be there when she wanted stability. The empty house disrupted that belief more effectively than any confrontation. Before going into work, I forwarded all my calls to voicemail and placed my phone on silent mode. I walked into the building with a steady pace, greeted a few coworkers, and sat at my desk. I spent the morning working as if nothing dramatic was unfolding a few miles away. Every now and then, I checked my phone to ensure it remained quiet. By 10 a.m., she had left 8 missed calls and 11 messages. The tone changed around the 5th message. The early ones sounded like confusion. The next one sounded like fear. The last ones carried the unmistakable rhythm of someone trying to gather control before it slips. At lunch, I stepped outside to the bench area behind the office. The cold air felt sharp enough to keep me focused. My phone lit up again, but this time it wasn't her. It was her mother. I ignored it as well. Rena had probably driven straight to her parents' house after failing to reach me. I could picture her sitting at the edge of their sofa, shaking her leg anxiously, hoping to frame herself as the victim before I told any story of my own. What she didn't realize was that I had no interest in building narratives or convincing anyone of anything. I only wanted distance. Around noon, I received the first message from Demir. The preview showed his number, not saved in my phone, but recognizable from the area code. He asked if I was around town because Rena had shown up at his workplace in tears. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to read more to understand the situation. She had gone to him looking for reassurance. She probably expected him to comfort her or pull her into his arms the way she used to describe from her college days. Instead, he was now contacting me because she had dragged him into something he didn't want to handle. I returned inside and worked through the afternoon with a focus sharper than usual. By the end of the day, I had finished tasks that normally required 2 days. Something about the silence made everything clearer. Rena, meanwhile, had likely been unraveling. She hated ambiguity, especially the kind she did not control. The empty house was more than a shock. It was a mirror showing her that her plans no longer mattered. When I left work, I drove not toward home, but toward a small legal office located near the main square. I had called ahead earlier that morning, requesting a brief consultation. The attorney, a calm older man named Branton, listened carefully as I explained the situation. I told him about the apartment, the lease, and the possible misuse of my personal information. He made several notes, asking for dates and copies of documents. He did not react with shock, which I appreciated. Instead, he laid out what I needed to secure: updated passwords, monitored credit activity, and clear documentation of what belonged to me. He said that by removing my belongings before any confrontation, I had already prevented complications. As we spoke, my phone vibrated again. This time I checked the screen. 17 missed calls, 11 voicemails, dozens of messages. The most recent ones came from her co-worker Sonata, pleading that I contact Rena because she was afraid. I set the phone face down on the desk and continued listening to Branton. When I left the office that evening, I felt a sense of organization settling through my mind, as if the last few days had shifted me into a new lane. I drove toward the apartment, but parked 2 blocks away. I wanted to see if she had returned before I went inside. From the corner of the street, I saw her car in the driveway. I expected that. She always retreated to familiar spaces when she felt overwhelmed. I waited several minutes, partially hidden by the angle of the parked trucks. The living room lights were on. She walked back and forth, occasionally stopping near the window, probably checking if I was coming home. Finally, she opened the front door and stepped outside, holding her phone as if it were an emergency device. She scanned the street, saw nothing, and went back inside. I watched her for a moment longer, then drove away. I went to a hotel on the other side of town, checked in under my name, and kept my bag beside the bed. I ordered a basic dinner, sat down by the window, and reflected on how quickly clarity can adjust the direction of someone's life. At 9 p.m., everything changed again. My phone began vibrating nonstop. At first I thought she was simply escalating her attempts. Then I noticed a contact from my workplace's front desk. I answered. The receptionist asked if I was safe. Confused, I asked what happened. She explained that Rena had shown up at the building demanding to see me. She created a scene in the lobby, accusing the staff of hiding me. When security asked her to calm down, she refused and tried to push past the desk. They escorted her out after she raised her voice loud enough to disturb people in the adjacent office. The receptionist sounded unsettled. I thanked her for letting me know and hung up. I sat there for several moments absorbing the information. This was the moment her illusion broke. She had believed she could control the narrative, but her actions had turned public. She had brought her chaos into my workplace, a place she used to praise for its calm structure. That was the mind-blowing moment I expected, the collapse of her confidence. I checked the messages after that. Rena had sent long paragraphs that shifted from panic to guilt to blame. She insisted I talk to her immediately, claiming that everything was a misunderstanding, claiming that she was worried something terrible had happened to me, claiming that I should at least tell her I was safe. The tone changed again around the 10th message. She started accusing me of punishing her unfairly, suggesting that leaving the house without warning was cruel, implying that she deserved answers. She had always used emotional pressure to steer conversations, but now it sounded desperate and unfocused. I turned off the phone and placed it beside the bedside lamp. I didn't sleep right away. I lay there thinking about how quickly people reveal their true nature when control slips out of their hands. Rena had built her image around confidence, grace, and emotional intelligence. But underneath that, she had relied heavily on the assumption that she could predict me, guide me, shape me. She believed I would always choose peace over disruption. She never understood that silence is not weakness. Silence is preparation. Silence is the space where decisions form. And by the time she realized something had changed, the decisions were already set. The night ended with me sitting beside the window, watching the hotel parking lot grow quiet. My future had shifted over the last 24 hours, but not in a chaotic way. It had shifted in a structured, deliberate manner. I knew that the next day would bring heavier consequences for her, and nothing she said would stop the motion she had started. Rena woke up that morning in an empty house. By the end of that night, she realized she no longer had a predictable man to fall back on. Morning light crept through the hotel curtains in a thin strip, cutting across the room like a quiet reminder that the world keeps moving even when someone's personal life collapses overnight. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully awake, staring at the silent phone on the nightstand. I had turned it off after the receptionist's call. I turned it back on now only to handle the final steps of separation. The screen immediately flooded with notifications. Calls, messages, voicemails, missed video chat attempts, even a few emails. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I took a breath, stood up, and began the day the way I always did, methodically. I showered, dressed, and packed my bag. I checked out of the hotel and drove straight to the bank before going to work. The branch manager confirmed that none of my accounts had unauthorized credit inquiries yet. I placed fraud alerts on everything anyway. I changed my email passwords, updated authentication settings, and set up notification layers that would ping me if anything shifted. It wasn't paranoia, it was prevention. Rena had demonstrated enough ambition to make her intentions clear. After that, I drove to work in a steady rhythm, ready for the day. My coworkers greeted me without mentioning the scene Rena caused the previous night. Most of them hadn't been present when it happened. Those who had clearly decided to avoid asking questions, which I appreciated. The general manager stopped by my desk later that morning. He asked if everything was okay. I assured him it was handled. He nodded and walked away without pressing further. People can sense when a situation is private, and he respected the boundary. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a single message from her mother. She asked if I could meet briefly. She said it was important. I left it unread. I had no interest in navigating emotional pleas from someone who never intervened when Rena used manipulation as a strategy. They had always let her shape the truth as she wanted, and they always believed her version. I had no intention of participating in that pattern again. By the time work ended, I received a notification from my credit monitoring service. Someone had attempted to apply for a small personal loan using my information. The application was stopped instantly because of the fraud alert I had placed hours earlier. I didn't need to guess who submitted it. The timing aligned perfectly with her panic. I screenshotted the alert and filed it in a separate folder to show Branton. I drove straight to the legal office. Branton reviewed the alert and nodded with a calm expression. He began preparing the paperwork to formally protect my identity. He recommended freezing my credit temporarily and documenting all attempts. He even drafted a written statement to present if future incidents occurred. He worked efficiently, and I appreciated that he treated the situation as practical rather than emotional. By early evening, I left his office with a stack of documents and a clear plan. I drove to a different part of town this time and checked into a short-term rental instead of another hotel. The place was quiet. One bedroom, small kitchen, clean windows overlooking a narrow alley. It wasn't home, but it was safe. Around 7 p.m., my phone rang again. It buzzed so aggressively that I glanced at the screen out of instinct. It was a number I recognized, Rena's father. I hesitated, then rejected the call. I didn't know him an explanation either. Seconds later, a message appeared from him saying they needed to talk because something had happened. I didn't respond. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me, though not for emotional reasons. I wanted to know how far she had spiraled. I blocked her number earlier that day, so I opened the messaging app where the old threads remained. There were dozens of messages from Rena I hadn't opened. I scrolled through the previews without tapping. One message preview caught my attention. She said she had gone to Demir's house after work, hoping he would help her talk to me, but he refused to let her inside. He told her he didn't want to deal with chaos, and he drove away with her still standing on the sidewalk. The next preview said she tried staying with a coworker, but the coworker refused because Rena had caused a scene in the lobby of my workplace. Apparently word had spread. I closed the app. This wasn't satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. This was the result of her own actions unfolding naturally. She had spent years assuming everyone would catch her when she fell. Now she was learning that people only tolerate chaos when it doesn't explode in public. I went to sleep early that night. The following day brought the real consequences. Around 10 a.m., I received a call from my bank's fraud department. They informed me that someone had attempted to open a joint account using my name and Rena's. The representative sounded confused, asking if I authorized it. I told them no. They froze the attempt, flagged her information, and recommended I keep additional monitoring active. 2 hours later, I received a message from my landlord confirming that Rena had gone to the leasing office demanding to be added to the lease. She told them I had abandoned her and that she needed legal access to the apartment. The leasing staff checked the file, saw my note from earlier that morning, and informed her politely that she had no legal standing to modify anything. She left the office in tears, according to them. That evening, I finally decided to drive by the apartment. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street and watched quietly. Her car wasn't there. The curtains were closed. The house looked untouched, as if it had been placed behind thick glass. For the first time, I realized something important. She wasn't coming home because she didn't know what home meant anymore. Without control, she didn't know where to stand. 2 days passed. During that time, I remained in the rental, went to work, met once more with Branton, and gradually removed my name from every shared utility. I sorted through the last of my belongings and arranged for a moving company to pick up the remaining items. I didn't notify her. There was nothing to discuss. By the end of the week, I had shifted everything of value out of the apartment. It became a shell of what used to be our life. My clothing, tools, personal files, and sentimental items were gone. I only left behind the basic furniture and anything she personally bought. On Friday morning, I received an email from my company's HR department. They said someone had shown up at the office again asking for me. Security turned them away immediately. HR wanted to confirm I felt safe. I thanked them and assured them I had taken steps to handle the situation privately. That evening, the final collapse happened. Her mother called again, not with pleading, but with a short message saying they needed to meet about something urgent involving law enforcement. I didn't respond. 30 minutes later, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't know. I listened. It was Rena. Her voice sounded exhausted and small. She said she was under review for the attempted loan application because the bank had contacted her employer. Her job required financial integrity checks, and she now had to explain why her name was attached to someone else's information without authorization. She said she didn't know how to fix everything. I deleted the voicemail. 3 more days passed quietly after that. I finalized the move, returned the apartment keys to the leasing office, and signed the release. The apartment was no longer my responsibility. I moved into a new place across town, small, clean, quiet, overlooking a park. 2 months later, I started a small home renovation business. My woodworking tools from the storage unit became part of my daily routine again. The business grew quickly because I worked with steady attention, something I had nearly forgotten I possessed. Occasionally, I heard bits of information through mutual acquaintances. Rena lost her job after the financial review. The attempted loan under my name triggered a deeper investigation. Her parents stopped supporting her financially because the situation had embarrassed them. Demir blocked her after she showed up at his workplace again. Even Sonata stopped answering her messages. She tried contacting me once more through a friend's phone, but I ignored it. There was no need for conversation. The story had already ended. Months later, I met someone new. Not a dramatic romance, not a rebound, just a calm connection with someone who respected boundaries and didn't treat stability like a weakness. Her name was Alina, and she asked about my past only when it became relevant, never when it wasn't. Life didn't become perfect. It became normal in a healthier way. Rena learned her consequences not through punishment, but through the steady collapse of the safety nets she assumed would always catch her. And I learned something too. Sometimes the quietest exit is the strongest one.